Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online, and we are less than a week from FanFest. So personally, I don't think we'll get like dev blogs before FanFest, but I did just take a quick look at the schedule, and so it's on Friday. Where we will get the EVE Online keynote, which I do have to work and actually have to be in the office, 100% sure, so I will have to look at the keynote later, unfortunately, but I think that will basically be the big information dump, and that simultaneously they'll probably release like dev blogs and probably a trailer, stuff like that. At least that is my read and my expectation on the situation. So in general, we don't have any concrete news for EVE Online over the last week, except that CCP has been holding quite a few sales. Like a desperate central bank, it is crashing or crushing the price for plex, as you can see on, oh, and I should actually move my mouse here for just a second. As you can actually see on the screen right now, but let's focus on news. We did get something, which is the new scope video. I thought it was pretty interesting. Pretty obviously lore-wise, this is a little bit of lore perspective for the changes to the prices of dreadnoughts. They are going to become substantially cheaper, so that players can make a lot more of them and can basically use dread bombs, have a cheaper way of sieging structures and things like that, and big targets, you could say. So that was one part of it, but I personally have been very surprised at the amount of straight up avatar character footage that there has been there, walking in stations. So yeah, we will see exactly what's behind all of that. It could be nothing, it could just be tech that CCP is still experimenting with, but I'm kind of hopeful that we'll get some sort of announcement in that direction when it comes to EVE Online. Having not just ship gameplay but also avatar gameplay would go a long way to making the increased price for EVE Online a thing that's actually worth it. Other than that, don't really have a lot to say, so we'll take a quick look at the new Eden store. I am definitely curious at this point, what the hell will they announce at FanFest? But let's take a look here. So that's no, that's just a package price, I think. Here we don't notice anything. Skins, a couple of them front and center, but nothing on sale. Apparel, can't really notice anything. And then we've got these, just a package price. So I think at this point we're basically talking that there are some sales happening on the EVE Online website itself. So let's take you out and let's go to the market and start with our pilot services, coming in at what is it, 3 minutes 5 seconds. There we go, and we can of course start with plex, where if we start off on the chart, you can see that we are clearly going back down substantially, and this massive volume spike that pushed the price well above 3 million to even 3.5 million on like the second day has been all about the announcement for the higher prices in the game. I think now volumes are still pretty high. If you look at the volumes in the last couple of days, I think this is extra supply from the sales that CCP is holding. I've in fact been bombarded with emails as well from CCP explaining that this is the right time to buy lots of plex and plex your account and all of that good stuff, which I think is driving the price back down a little bit. But the extra margin, we are above 3 million for the average price. I don't think that's going away, and I do think that this is going to be a trend for at least up until we might reach like an even worse summer slump or something like that. I do think that the trend will be upwards because of the price change that is coming on May 17 for the real life cost of the game. So we're at 3.2 million for the sellers and above 3 million for the buyers as well in the player owned trade hubs. Yeah, a little bit more competition, so just getting closer to 3.1 million there, and then these sellers are in competition with Jida, so not much change here. Pretty narrow margin on this recovery for the price. I do think it's basically going to stop once the sales stop, and that then an upward trajectory is to be expected. The multiple pilot training certificates, also a bit of a bump here. And higher in price, but also kind of stabilizing. I guess that there is a little bit of communication between what happens to Plex and what happens to the training certificate. We're currently paying 1.35 billion for the sellers and above 1.3 billion for the buyers. So here we do have a narrowing of the margin as well. I think as Plex sales start to diminish and that price starts to go up, we'll see upwards pressure for the training certificate as well. I'll put the body rescope certificate here just to take a look at it. Super stable, very low volumes, so this is not really something that's all that interesting. It does cost 325 million for the sellers and 223 for the buyers, so you do have a massive margin between sellers and buyers on a good that's hardly used by anyone. But perhaps let's speculate for a moment. If avatar gameplay, walking in stations and things like that become a part of the game, maybe your avatar becomes your character for like the shooter or something like that on the longer term. Basically, I don't think it's going to be enough. It would be mind-boggling, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. But if there is something more to do with your character, this could be a massive opportunity, of course. But granted, I would also say it's a massive gamble. I myself would not take that bet. Except I do have a decent amount of ISK and like a buy order. Maybe try to grab one for less than 250, and if something happens there, it could be kind of interesting. So I'm actually gonna leave it in. I was thinking for a moment maybe I'll take it out. I'm actually gonna leave it in here because who knows what we'll get at FanFest in less than a week. For the skill extractor then, very close to Plex of course, we also have the increased price, went up to above 400 million, couldn't maintain that, and well, I think turning Plex into extractors is not that hard. So we're at 365 million for the sellers, 356 million for the buyers. Again, very narrow margin on the, I think, increased supply from the Plex sale that's happening at the moment. That'll stop eventually, and then my expectation is that we'll get an upward trend. Impact on the skill injectors. Here are the large skill injectors. Very interesting, not exactly what I expected. I thought we would see more hesitation like here. So my rationale is increased prices for the game, fewer alts in play, fewer demand for the large scale injectors. But at the moment, I'm guessing that the increased price of Plex and the extractors that is to be expected is just dominating the psychology for the large scale injector market. And so we're at a 1-year high point above 700 million ISK. 715, 717 very quickly for the sellers and 680 for the buyers. That's actually good news for me because I am holding at least one large scale injector and I think 1 or 2 small scale injectors as well as part of my long-term strategy. So maybe we'll keep an eye on that. My personal way of looking at it is going to be I'll keep an eye on Plex, as once that increased price continues, I expect the same thing to happen for the large scale injector, but then I'll have to decide first to sell before Plex starts to drop back off, and that'll might just be a little bit ahead of the summer or something like that. Then we've got the small scale injector that has a little bit more volatility. Definitely interesting, right? Smaller price package, bigger volumes. I think large scale injector, no, actually 2,500 a day for the large scale injector, and then the small scale injector only around 500 a day. And look at the volatility. You have serious pullbacks on the daily averages that have happened over the last 2 weeks over the course of a full week, and then another step up, as I think the general upwards pressure just isn't stoppable. We're again at a 1-year high point on this one as well though, talking 140 million for the sellers, 136 million for the buyers, very narrow margin for all of them. Yeah, my expectation again, upwards pressure should start once sales end, and then once the price hike actually happens, I think there will get even more upwards pressure on pretty much this entire parallel services category. Maybe an exception, the daily alpha injector, although it is now climbing up to 50 million ISK. Very interesting. I don't think we saw anything to the prices of this, but definitely let me know in the comments if I'm wrong on that. And then we've got the market data for that one. 50 million for the sellers, 47 million for the buyers. The real real interesting thing is, will we see another CCP intervention as we saw here in November? Get above 50, the central bank comes in, makes a massive sale. Look at the volumes for a whole week. We got massive volumes, crashing the price down below 40. We're back here again. This does mean that an alpha player, rather than having to earn 40-45 million in a day for the daily alpha injector for getting that skill point boost, now needs to earn over 50 million a day. It is more work. And a harder thing to achieve, and I think honestly CCP has been pretty successful with the daily alpha injector. Also for alts, right? Even if you use this for alts, it is more work that you have to put in, and then the more alts, I mean, if you then have to do like 10 of them, we're talking 500 million that you've got to earn a day instead of 400 million. That's a huge difference. It becomes a lot harder to do that through passive means and things like that. So those daily alpha injectors are, I think, going to be expensive at the moment. I would say it's not unlikely that CCP might do something around FanFest as well. For the new players, for the alpha players, here's another alpha injector sale. It would be the perfect sales pitch, and then of course we would see another serious pullback for the price. And you can see here on the volumes that it does take a while for this market to absorb that. So I would say there is this piecemeal consumption for daily alpha injectors. That's a reality, but at the moment basically super expensive. Then we have the hypercores left here. They are on the plex jump. We went up above 380,000, pulling back from that again. So my expectation is really narrow margin here. 337,000 for the sellers, 311 for the buyers. That's a 26,000. That's less than 10%. It's not as narrow as what I expected, but it's definitely a pretty narrow margin here as well. Everything above 300k, so it is expensive. And yeah, once again, I expect sales to eventually stop there in the plex market, and this will actually start to move up as well. It's my expectation. There's definitely no certainty in that. Next up, the mineral market coming in at 1140. There we go. As always, we start with titanium. You may already have spotted that on the screen as well. We are now below 380, so we're desperately trying to defend that. We're staying well clear from the 3.5, and we're clearly hesitating to go even lower for titanium. But first sellers coming in here within JITA below 3.8 ISK, 378 kind of volumes, 150 million, 90 million units, still pretty damn high. It's definitely less than above the 380, but you can see that supply is still very strong. Buyers coming in at 364. I do think 350 will be defendable, but the pressure is still on for titanium. And I think that we might just have an even lower average price before we really form that bottom. I would be very careful. It does start to look like we're trying at least. Let's see if pyrite is doing something different. I actually tried to form a bottom right here below 7.5. Managed to make its way back on the daily averages above 7.5, but you can see the pressure is still on, and we're back below that. We're talking 751 for the sellers, but 703 for the buyers. And I would not be surprised if actually even more supply comes in and is basically willing to trade between 7 and 7.5 before all of this is settled. So be careful. We are trying to find those bottoms, and it's still, in my opinion, not the time to look for pyrite or titanium. Focus on Mixolon. It's relatively still doing better, I think, but I do think we will finally start to hit bottom prices here. Then we've got Mexalon. That is the continued slide. We're basically back at the summer prices that were really low, but the response of the changes to industry in general. So before the mining changes, the increased availability, we basically negated all the gains that were made on post-summer activity. And right here we are back down quite substantially. 56 for the sellers, 56 for the buyers as well. So the margin has closed here. That's the first buyer, 4 million, not that much, but it's more than what the sellers are bringing in volumes. And then 54, 52 is another one. That's actually a little bit of a gap right there, but maybe we'll form a bottom here again as well at around 55. We'll have to wait and see. The general activity here though is we're just oversupplying high-sec minerals, and those prices are substantially under pressure. That means that you might want to look for some opportunities, some risk, and some trips to low-sec. Let's see what Isogen is doing. A little bit as expected, we are starting to see some more normal dynamics, some pullbacks as well in the price after the roller coaster ride of especially the last couple of months, going from 150 to 350 ISK at the high point. All of this, I think, a combination of factors, a little bit more industry happening, a little bit more outlook as well for industry with the change that is being announced there. We are finally chewing through those reserves. No longer do we just generally see a couple $100 million being brought to the market, things like that. And in general, the market has switched to, yeah, let's be careful here, because we are consuming Isogen, and eventually the actual flows will start to dictate the price. And that means that all Isogen that's already in the game is actually worth a lot more than some players might expect. So here we are talking 356 for the sellers and 327 for the buyers. Pretty healthy margin. And then if you look at this front page for the sellers, we get 10 million here, 14 million units down here, couple at 6, 3 million, but get those 10 pluses out of there, which is not even that much. And you're actually in, I think, pretty normal numbers right there. 3 million as a high point, and then some sell orders in a couple millions to hundreds of thousands. I think this will be the normal supply, and that is quite a difference from what we're seeing down here. For instance, 200 million units, 30 million units, another 10 million units being brought in. That is, of course, still those old reserves who are now expecting prices that could reach 600 ISK. Some people even 1000 ISK, although these might be typos or something like that. Not really sure. Considering the volumes, they are not very consequential, but yeah, the dynamic is clearly changing on the edge of the market, you could say, where price discovery is happening. There are some players that are trying to front run the market and put up those big orders, hoping that we'll bump into that in the next 2 months. Could actually happen, we really don't know, but active supply demand volumes look way lower, but we're also starting to see our first bit of price action where, yeah, just heading straight for 400. Market is not willing to do that just yet. Then we've got the Noxium market right here, and actually we see a pretty serious pullback here as well, heading back to its lower end of the range at around 1000 ISK. We're talking 1061 for the sellers, 1002 for the buyers. Buyers are still forced to pay 1000 ISK for Noxium. I don't personally expect that to change, but perhaps those that do mine in low sec will start to switch their focus a little bit from just the Noxium to include a little bit of Isogen, and this is how we're now getting this supply demand dynamic. That means that you don't always just go up. There are times in the game when you supply a little bit too much, and then that drives prices down. My expectation personally is that we will start to slow down in supply here a little bit, and that'll give prices a little bit of breathing room. But we must not forget that high sec oversupply is pressure that might spill over into low sec, because as I've said, for me personally, that's what I would do if I were to be mostly a miner and not just mostly an explorer at the moment. Then what I would do is I would have my optimal setup, which would probably be an Orca, maybe Retriever, and then compressing the Orca or something like that. I would have my setup for high sec, but I would clearly notice that my ISK per hour would be going down. So I would invest a little bit of money in some smaller ships and then risk some low sec mining as well. And this might be happening in larger quantities than we expect. This and putting that downwards pressure on low sec. The increased availability just makes that happen, I think, or maybe a little bit of decline in demand as well. Then we've got nullsec, so that means we move to Zydrine. That's also seeing pressure. That's interesting. We're clearly seeing pressure across the board here. Zydrine going down to 1069 ISK for the sellers and 900, below 900 at 892 for the buyers. That's actually a surprisingly wide margin between sellers and buyers for a nullsec mineral. So that does, in my book, mean that there is this pressure that is starting to come through on the general mineral market. It's going going to be interesting to see how that evolves. And then we've got Megasite that's also seeing pressure, but that's still relative, able to defend 1000. This just brings it in line with Zydrine. Sellers coming in at 1014, buyers at 960, way more narrow margin here, much more what I would expect for a Nosik mineral. But the pressure in general now for all Tech 1 minerals is here. That's definitely something that we've basically seen for the first time this week, and something to keep in mind, that there might be more happening than just the high-sec, low-sec and null-sec supply dynamics. There might be something happening on the demand side there as well. Then we've got our others. Here is a Morphite tied to Tech 2, making its way back up a little bit. And that could be because it's so cheap now for Tech 2 that there might actually be a little bit more demand for Morphite, just to make more Tech 2 stuff in general. If it becomes cheaper, back to 43,600, right? That's still quite relative compared to 100k in the summer, but 43,600 to 41,000 current price for Morphite. And I think I forgot them last time, but here are the chromodynamic tricarboxyls. Those are going back up a little bit, back above 50,000 SKPs at 66,000 for the sellers and 24,000 for the buyers. That's a huge margin, so this definitely has to be a little bit of a niche thing. It's used in some stuff, Hedone optimizer blueprints. It's not used in a lot, but it does apparently have a huge amount of volatility. And I actually don't really know where this stuff comes from. If anyone, is it Triglavian? Darker use in the refinement, death glow, underground markets. Well, let me know in the comments. I actually don't know where you would get chromodynamic tricarboxyls, but it's definitely pretty interesting to see this huge margin on something that's basically considered to be a mineral. Let's move on to PI next. That's coming in at 2110. There we go, and as always we start with the broadcast nodes. Let's take a look at the price history. Alright, back at the high end of the trade range, a little bit in line with my read on the situation there. Sure, they are going to nerf part of PI for the construction of larger ships, but they're clearly aiming at making more ships a reality in the game, and that also means more demand for some of these PI materials. And so for broadcast nodes, definitely pretty high at the moment, 1.7 million pretty much for the sellers and 1.6 million for the buyers, showing that there is demand even at these prices. Construction blocks are actually making their way back up here. Might be a little bit of an overestimation of CCP's announcement that some of the simple lower tier PI materials would get the brunt of the nerfs. It's a reality in water, but that might just have had a desired effect on coolant, bringing that one down back below 10k. But for construction blocks here, I think in general you need construction blocks for a lot of the higher end ones, and as a result those prices are going up. I'm right on that. So definitely used in a lot of Tech 2 stuff. And then goes to smart fab. It goes, yeah, I think, and the smart fab I think is pretty common, definitely used in sterile conduits, for instance. So it is part of the larger cycle. So they are making their way back up here. 9,000 for the sellers, 8.5 for the buyers. That's a pretty narrow margin here as well. I think demand for construction blocks has picked up yet again. Coolants, not such good news. Of course, if like me you're a coolants producer, CCP definitely hit my very good passive income that I had spotted here, especially over the last couple of months. 10k, 11k, awesome time to sell coolants, but with the nerf to water in general, down to 8,400 for the sellers, 8,120 for the buyers, basically in line with most of the other refined PI materials. And let's keep that in mind as well. This might have just been straight up the aim from CCP, that has said that they're willing to take a little bit of a more proactive approach in the market itself. And one thing that I think will remain a part of CCP's philosophy is that it's active gameplay that they want to see rewarded, not passive gameplay like PI. And as a result, coolants look really good, and it's super easy to set up. So they're saying maybe we'll make that a little bit less valuable by nerfing the very basic of this one, which is the I always have a problem with that one, but the liquids to the water production cycle, the water there has been nerfed substantially. Then we get enriched uranium, actually seeing pressure here as well, down to 10,000. That's still relatively good though, right? 10,000 to 97, showing again pretty strong demand, I would say, considering the close margin. Then our integrity response drones not doing so hot, but again, I would say that's relative. 1.5 million is not a bad price range, especially on the low end of the curve here, 1.5 to 1.3 million. And immediately on this downtrend, you can see that it's a demand problem that is not keeping the prices in a 1.5 to 2 million range because of the amount of buy orders here. There's not a lot. Then we've got our mechanical parts also falling down substantially, following coolants 8.5 to 8.150, basically again in line with the more I would say expected or targeted prices for refined PI materials. It's a possibility. I mean, this is speculation on my part, but it's a possibility that CCP says we don't want this to just go above 10k, especially not in a sustained way. Then we get our miniature electronics, a little bit different. Refined PI material probably needs, then it needs like a number of others below that. And that is actually going up in price above 10,000 ISK. Oh, that's refined. Ooh, that's actually a refined one as well. I thought it was more complex just from the look here, but no. All right, miniature electronics, 10,630, 10,000 for the buyers. Let's take a quick look at what that's used in. Also smart fab units, and then planetary vehicles, I think also pretty commonly used in integrity response drones, for instance. So part of the advanced PI material cycle for sure. That one is seeing strong demand and actually a high price at the moment. So it's not as easy to predict the entire market. Here's nano factories, a little bit of pressure, but still making it towards a million for most sellers. Ooh, a couple of big sellers coming in at 950,000 though, are going to keep this really stable. 850,000 for the buyers. So this one, don't expect it to move anytime soon. Organic mortar applicators starting to slow down on the descent here, forming a bottom at the low end of the range. Clearly one of the worst performing advanced PI materials, 620,000 to 530,000 on this one. Then we get our recursive computing modules, also seeing some pressure, but again trying to defend that 1 million range, 1 million to a million, so super narrow margin. Here the demand is there, I think, to support a million. Then we get robotics, pretty flat, maybe a tiny bit of pressure right here. Never really able to go above 70k in any substantial way. 69,000 for the sellers, 66,000 for the buyers though. So that again is a pretty narrow margin, showing decent demand is in some parts of the PI market. Then we get 10k for our rocket fuels. A little bit of pressure here on the sellers, just below 10,000 this, but 9,400 for the buyers again as well. That's not bad. Self-harmonizing power cores had a bump up to 2 million, are now landing on the 1.5 million, 1.62 to 1.52. I would say that's actually a normal margin. That's not a lot of high demand, but that's a normal margin, I would say. Then we get our smart fab units, actually part of this one, seeing some pressure, not exactly sure. Let's see, 64,000 to 50,000, right? So buyers do have a wide margin between here to take profits or to try to grab cheap smart fab units. Maybe a little bit of overproduction is expected here as well, as players will probably move a little bit away from coolants when all of this is said and done. Then we get sterile conduits, trying to hold on to a million, just below that for the sellers, above 900,000 for the buyers. I'd say that's still a reasonable margin as well. Supercomputers here, 68,000 to 65,000. Here I would say again, pretty narrow margin, pretty decent demand. Our synthetic oils are going up a little bit. 8.6 to 8,000, and this can happen as well. Basically don't have that much in synthetic oil supply. What is this stuff used in? Let's take a quick look at that. Ucumming superconductors and cryoprotected solutions actually makes sense because there is going to be a link to implant production that has been at a pretty high point. Synaptic fibers are going back down a little bit. 89k to 81k, still pretty reasonable. Transcranial micro controllers, 80k to 72k, so for a specialized that seems to be generally the rule. Water cooled CPU, 64 to 6000, they're pretty cheap. And then finally we get the wetware mainframes that are trying to make their way back to 1.5 million. They're almost there, but then 143 million for the buyers, 148 million for the sellers, again showing really strong demand with a pretty narrow margin. So this might just be the reality as well, something to keep in mind. CCP has made PI part of their levers for some industry in EVE Online, but as a result that also means that they not only have an influence on the end product, but they can also have an influence on the value of PI itself. And from my read, I would say they're actually happy with like 20% below 10,000 disk for refined ones, with like a 20% below 10,000 disk for the next step here, the specialized one. And then once you go a little bit higher towards advanced, of course, there's definitely a little bit of difference depending probably on the exact amounts needed in some of the popular large ships. But yeah, PI, I would say, is doing decently well. We're seeing strong demand in a lot of them, but don't expect this to all of a sudden become super valuable and something that'll like carry your account or anything like that. I don't think that's something that CCP will actually ever really let happen anymore. Next up, the advanced moon materials. That's coming in at 30.05. There we go. As always, we start with the carbides, and I should have everything to do this right now. So we've got crystalline carbonite for Galente, and the price charts, yeah, a little bit as expected. Pressure is back, heading back to that low point of around 100 disk. 104 to 93 is now for the buyers. This is the effect of the increased availability and the organization around moon mining that has really taken front and center for a lot of players in EVE Online that focus on mining. Then we've got Caldari, which is the titanium carbide market that also had definitely a push back up after we broke 100 disk on the downside. So here there was just a massive amount of oversupply, but then the dynamic takes over again, that there is more supply than demand, and so we are seeing that pressure from 132 at a high. Sellers are now down to 117 already, 116 for those buyers. So the margin is pretty narrow. We get slightly better demand here for titanium carbide, but honestly I think pressure might just continue because those buyers seeing all of that supply will eventually say, hey, we're gonna lower our prices here, try and grab some cheaper ones. So I think that's what is bound to happen here. Then we usually go to Minmatar, which is a ferrite carbide that's now substantially below on the disk and is basically, I think, bottoming out here below 90 at 88 for the sellers and 83 for the buyers. And then we get tungsten carbide for Amar that's heading for 100 at this point, 110 to 109. So that margin is gone as well, but I would say here you can see here those guys are buying maybe a couple million units. These guys are bringing millions and millions of units at these prices. I think the pressure is going to continue, and 100 disk is going to be something that'll actually have to be defended quite vigorously by the market. It may not even succeed in doing so. Then our meta materials here is Galente is where we start. Photonic metamaterials for Galente, obviously suffering from all of that supply as well, and basically back at the low end here. 7,200 for the sellers, 5,800 for the buyers. That's a huge gap that's still opened up here. This really, I think, does mean that the buyers of this market are like, this is just gonna keep cratering, and the only thing I'm willing to buy is basically ridiculously low compared to everything that's happened over the last year, which does not bode well for players that are expecting or hoping for higher prices in Take 2 ships, I will be honest. Then we have Caldari, which is non-linear metamaterials, continuing the cratering as well, and still has a little bit more to go, right? Has always been more expensive than everything else, so it's now heading for 10,000 disk at a rapid pace. 11,000 for the sellers, buyers at 9,900, but I would again right here 200,000 units, 100,000 units, 120,000 units. Buyers are coming in for 10,000 units. Here there's a big one at 95 that'll need to be chewed through, but everything else is substantially lower all of a sudden. I think that the pressure here is still going to continue. You can even see that the gap is opening up between 5-day and 20-day moving average. That's also a sign that it's accelerating. Then we have Caldari moving to Minmatar. I always have to do a lot of thinking here, but it's alright. Here's plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar, also reaching 10,000 discs, losing pretty much 50% of its value from the start of the year. 10,340 to 9,900. Again, same story, I would say. 500 units, 50,000 units. Here we get 120,000, 120,000, 500,000 units. So the pressure is still on. I don't think 10k can be defended. It's my read on the situation here. Finally, we get Amar with terahertz metamaterials that's landing on 10,000. But you can see here again that those daily averages are seeing those higher ranges on the downside, or breaking through the 10,000 disc barrier. So we're talking first seller even aggressive. No, that could be one of those errors here again. But 10.5 for the sellers, 9,000 is for the buyers. So buyers are just here. They have basically, chewed through everyone that was willing to pay close to 10k. And at 9,000 disc, players are finally starting to hesitate. I think for especially for Minmatar that's going to happen, but for Caldari probably as well. So next up we still have some of the others. I don't think we can expect good news here. Fermionic condensate landing on 40k 1 year low point. Ferrogel going even lower now, below 20,000 ISK, 18 to 19,000 for the sellers, 18.7 for the buyers, but that again is a 1 year low point. Fullerite landing on 400 ISK, losing 660% from the start of the year, 1 year low point. Hypersynaptic fibers landing on 5,000 ISK, again 50% down from the start of the year, and most of that done in just the last couple of weeks. Nano transistors, 1 year low point, again landing on 2,500. Phenolic composites did try to come back up again as well after reaching 1,000 disc, but pressure is just not stopping. 1,033 to 1,018, and I think here 24k here. Most sell orders. There's one at 2.2 million here. It's probably a little bit, it's not that old. That's going to stall things a little bit. But if we get rid of this one, then you can again see the difference in volumes. This is an oversupply market, and calling the bottom is very difficult. Then we got our pressurized oxidizers that are now below 10,000 discs as well. I was expecting that pressure to mount. 9.5, 9.6 for the sellers, but 8,000 discs for the buyers. They want another 20% discount right here. Then our reinforced carbon fibers were already below 10,000 disc last week and are continuing to see pressure. We're now talking 6,800 for the sellers, 6.7 for the buyers. So here they are starting to finally come together, but yeah, again, it's like losing 40% in a matter of a couple of months again here as well. And then our ceramic fibers, the only one in the bunch that went below 200 discs. So this again is kind of important, right? It's not like from a 500 to a 250. We actually went to 200, a very pronounced 1 year low point. So some investors did start to come in, managed to push it back to 300 disc. But I again think here now that the pressure will be on to 90 to 245. That's already a little bit more margin that's opening up here. So for the advanced moon materials, don't expect better prices unless CCP really announces something big. What could be something big? Well, if we want to put on our speculator hat, absolute speculator hat here. So again, this is pure gambling, this is pure wishful thinking, but I do think that this is something that will be on the radar for CCP. Do they want Take-Two ships to become and Take-Two stuff to become that cheap? I'm not really sure, but if they could put in like an avatar gameplay related economy and also include Take-Two stuff, that could of course completely change this dynamic once again. But again, that's definitely potentially very, very hopeful thinking. Let's move on to Take-Two ships here, 3740. There we go. We'll go over this list decently quickly unless one of these ships really surprises me with a sell opportunity. I am expecting basically huge amounts of pressure considering what we just saw, the carnage in advanced movement. So let's get started here with the Basilisk. And yeah, it is continuing. You thought last week when we reached 130 million that we were going to see the market fight back a little bit. Nope, we are continuing to go straight down on pretty high volumes. We are now at 114 million for the sellers, 103 for the buyers. And so don't forget, at the start of the year you were paying 300 million ISK for a Basilisk. Now you're paying basically 100 million ISK. This has to be on CCP's radar, I think. Then we get to Cerberus. I mean, you know, this is also, of course, you know, an end of scarcity. This is a form of plentifulness, of course, but who knows? We'll have to keep an eye on all of it. Here's the Cerberus. This one does have a bit of hesitation at 150. I think it is a super strong ship, PvE, PvP, part of doctrines, if I'm not mistaken. So this one is going for a bit of a premium, 158 to 141 million. Definitely not the 1 year low point for this one. We had a sell opportunity at 180, but on the daily average, so that's almost impossible to really take advantage of. You need to see that 5-day moving average do something like right here. So it's very hard at the moment. I would say, you know, make sure that if you do invest in them, that it's also something that you might actually use and have some fun with at this point. Next here we get the Curse, 1 year low point, straight through the 150 down to 132 and 130 for a buyer, 125 then, but this is all that's happening on the buy side of the Curse. Then we get the Damnation, 1 year low point. I think we'll go over these a little bit more quickly when it's 1 year low points. This one could be interesting. Are we through the 20 million on the sellers? That would be super important psychologically, and here we go. First seller coming in at 99. And then they're just 0.1ing each other, but look at those volumes, 30, 16, 14, 78. Now those buyers here are still coming in at just below 19 million, but that's 11 ships compared to at least 100 Deacons coming in below 20 million. These will be gone, and then we're talking 15 million, and then we're really talking a leg down to 1 year low point and a new range that we haven't seen all year. If it's 15 million, losing again 50%, just like the advanced movements, could definitely be in the cards. Then we've got the Eagle, 1 year low point yet again. Then we get the EOS trading below 300 million. Aries trading below 37.5 million. I think sellers coming in 37, yeah, buyers coming in 31. Again, 6 million margin on a 30 million item is actually really big, so those buyers are super careful at the moment, which is the right tactic. Then we get the Flycatcher, did have a bump to 75 million, but cannot bug the trend and is now again below the 50 million, which we've only seen around the month change from March to April. So here I would say we're again very close to the low range, 48 million to 42 million. Buyers are touching again these lower ends at the moment. Then we've got the Guardian, 130, doing a little bit of a push up here as we broke 130. I think it is a very popular logistics cruiser in general, 134 million to 115. But yeah, clearly the range is completely different from the start of year, 250 million there. Then we get the Heretic, that's making its way back above 40 million. That's interesting. At the low point we were touching 30 million, so it would have been possible to buy a Heretic for 30 million. Now you're selling for 42. Buyers though are still at 31 million. So this really is very risky, very difficult, all about timing the market. And in the Heretic you had a little bit of a sale, but keep in mind you also had 10 days to pick him up, close to 30 million. So here I would say for the Heretic, for the first time and on the interdictor, yeah, this was a small trade that you could actually have made a little bit of profit on, and right now is your sell opportunity if that's something that you spotted. Then we've got the Hound, 1 year low range. We are talking about 17 million to almost 16 million for the buyers. The Iquitos that tried to trick Leven is a little bit different, but clearly also on the lower end of the range, below 600 million, not able to break through that, 590 to 557, pretty narrow margin. The Ishtar is now below 150 as well. Good luck coming back there, 144 to 127. Then we get the Kirin, if it wants to load. There we go. Logistics frigate, again below 20 million, so lowest range we've seen all year. There was clearly nervousness here if you look at those min-max prices, but now look at where they are. They're all down towards the 10 million range, even 18 million to 14 million. Manticore, 1 year lower range, also gave up, landing on 15 million. Monitor, our flag cruiser, below 300 million, so definitely pretty cheap, a little bit more expensive at the moment, but that's probably due to the very low volumes. Then we get the Nemesis that also just went through the 15 million mark for stealth bomber. You know, who would have thought? I always was like below 20 million, or we touched 20 million right here. That's a buy opportunity. That's a buy opportunity. Awesome. No brainer. And now look at that. We are in a completely different Tech 2 market, a completely different range. 14.2 to 13 million for a Nemesis. Nighthawk landing on 300 million. Again, 50% down from the start of the year. 600 million for a command chip at the start of the year. 300 million at the moment. Olneros 100 million, also a 50% loss, clearly 1 year low point. Purifier also 1 year low point now, and all of the min max is actually on the downside, so buyers are pretty aggressive here again. I think 18 million to 16.5 million, so clearly pressure and not a lot of buyers here. And yet 32, 38, 24, 10, 43, 92 being brought in below 18 million. That's huge amounts of pressure. We get the Rook below 150, also 1 year low point. Saber, same story. Scalpel, a little bit of a move up. Logistics Frigate again could be kind of interesting. I mean, this is not tradable, no way for that, but could be kind of interesting to see how that. Those are basically heading towards like those 10, 11 millions. Yeah, 13 million here for the buyers, back up to 17 million for those sellers. Those are actually like the cheapest, really small, but also the first to basically try those lows and potentially have a little bit of a pullback if a big chunk of logistics frigates gets bought. So yeah, if I look for tradable volatility, I would right now start with those Tech 1 ships, look for those crazy jumping points heading towards 10 million, and that's where you could take a gamble that could pay off. For the larger ships, I'd be very careful because we really don't know what those new ranges will be. Then we get the Scimitar landing on 130, so basically trading around that new range with a little volatility. Sleipnir going below 300 million as well. Thalia is a logistics frigate. Alright, the min-max ranges are all over the place. Basically, we need this one to break down. 16.6 to 14 million. If we get this buy stuff to an even lower range, then that could be your jumping point. It's going to be difficult considering the amount of buyers there. Then we get the Vagabond, 1 year low point below 150. And finally the Zarmas. That's again Triglavian doing a little bit better, more stable on the 1 year chart. Still worth 500 million, is 500 to 462. So for the Tech 2 ships, I would look potentially at trading, but I would go for the tiny ships for that first. Go for those frigates, right? That's like a 10-15 million investment. That's actually kind of doable and riskable in my book. Some of those are starting to show some clear signs of maybe some volatilities in the books, at least from my perspective. But other than that, I would definitely buy what I can see personal use for, because I don't know where those larger ships are going to end up at this point. Next up, the Tech 3 ship market, 46.35. There we go. As always, we start with Destroyer. So here is the Confessor, slow burn below 50 million, slight uptick at the tail end here, but nothing too major. 48 million to 44, 45 almost. 100 of them being brought in here a couple of weeks is creating stability, but no fresh supply for the Confessor. It is probably going to be the cheapest one of the three, so let's see what's happening with the Hecate. Is starting to crest right here. Daily average is clearly well below 55 million all of a sudden. 54 million to 51 million. That's the supply. Full page, more than a full page of new Hecates. So at least that is logical from my perspective. Then we've got the Jackdaw landing on 55 million, so 56 to 52. Fresh supply, not that much. That's a bit of a surprise. Where the hell are the Jackdaw producers? And yet those that do come in, of course, have the best tactical destroyer price handed to them on a silver platter. Finally, we get the Zwepel. That's basically stable above 45 million, 48, 47.7 to 43 million. New supply is next to nothing again. So for now, what is different is basically this huge pin here of 100 chips in the confessor that just pricking that one below 50 million, which means that it's now up to the Hecate and the Jackdaw to do stuff. And the Hecate has massive amounts of supply that is starting to decrease the price. It's going to be interesting to see if next week we see this stall and we actually see more Jackdaws come to the market, bringing that one down below 55 million. But if not, then yes, the first decoupling of the Zweppel from the other three has started to cause problems, and now that big confessor pin of 100 chips here is probably starting to cause problems again as well, which means that this tactical destroyer market is likely to become just completely unresponsive to one another and really just more of a gambler's market once again. For the cruisers, here is the Legion trading a little bit higher at the moment, back to the 190 range, 187 to 170, so really nice margin between sellers and buyers at the moment. You can see that right here, and from those min-max prices, not easy on the upside to get a buy order, but it does happen, as you can tell from the min-max prices. Then we get the Loki, actually seeing a little bit of pressure at the moment, coming down below the 200 million mark from 195 to 183. So that's less margin right here between sellers and buyers. Not my jumping point, but if we touch 180 on those min-max prices, that could start to be interesting. Then we get the Proteus, that's a bug here again, definitely seeing pressure after the CCP bump 188 to 169. Decent margin, basically in line with what's happening with the Legion, maybe a little bit too early to jump in. And then we get the Tengu. That one is a little bit more interesting, definitely seeing pressure at the moment. You can see even the minimum prices are going down well below 180, below 190 for the sellers and 170 for those buyers. If you want to take a gamble on something that then has higher potential, I would say the Tengu kind of looks interesting at the moment to look at the buy orders. So those are the tech tree ships. Yeah, if you're looking for active trading, well, in the current market, it is clearly not very easy. So let's take the extra product next. I'm choosing the ice products because you can actually see, and it's coming up on the screen at the moment, that fuels are under even more pressure. So 15-20 or 50-20, I should say, for ice products, and I want to kind of get a feel of what's happening there. Have they been suffering from that increased availability as well? So that's manufacturing and research, ice products, and it's not that many, so that's actually quite doable. All right, heavy water, first of all, actually above average and above 100 disc. It's still pretty cheap, of course, here, 115 to 104. Main reason why this is still this high has been mentioned during my latest live stream last week. No promises, couple of big weeks at work at the moment, but it was definitely fun to do. As someone mentioned, yeah, you need heavy water if you're going to compress in the Orca. And so that does mean that there's a demand side thing here that's keeping the prices above average, despite in all likeliness very, very high supply. But for the isotopes, this could be a different story, and it is. Look at that, 1 year low point, 430 to 373 for the buyer. So we're still in that phase, just like with advanced movements, where we're still trying to find the bottom at the moment. But clearly the doubling of availability has a very, very massive impact on the isotopes. Just look at that from December right here, straight down pretty much to another less than 400 for the sellers, 370 for the buyers. I'll do the isotopes quickly here. Here is nitrogen isotopes, same story, 430 to 370, and oxygen isotopes is going for 414 to 400 discs, slightly better on the buy side. Then we get liquid ozone, unfortunately below 100 discs, that's pretty cheap as well, 93 to 86. And then strontium is also completely down the drain, 1 year low point at 1640 to 1500 discs. So the ice products are clearly also one of those that have become quite plentiful from that perspective, right? End of scarcity, doubling of availability, and quite a bit of ice was already being mined, and I think it basically means that they're on the field a little bit longer, they're able to increase the supplies, and so except for the heavy water that's found some extra use in compression, these are at the moment very inexpensive and super supplied. So that's the state. Honestly, for those guys that are saying where the hell is prosperity, well, it's not immediate prosperity, but there's definitely cheaper prices to be found in quite a few categories at the moment. And as I've mentioned at the start of the video, less than a week till FanFest, the next EVE talk could be very interesting. For now, thank you so much for watching and listening. Thank you also for all your very kind comments and your support. It's highly appreciated. I'm definitely still in it for the long haul. I'm really curious to see where the game is going. But for now, I'll see you guys next time.